Wolf Pen Branch Mill is like a step back in time. Located only miles from downtown Louisville, Kentucky, this is one of the largest undeveloped tracts of land remaining in eastern Jefferson County. Rich with historical treasures and alive with extraordinary natural wonders, this fragile ecosystem, one of the most important in the state of Kentucky, holds its own on the edge of a virtual land rush by commercial developers.
When I think about Wolf Pen now, I remember the sounds. I remember the sound of the waterfalls so well. So cooling, so soothing. The sound of the birds, the locusts. And I particularly remember the sound of the mill. You start the water in the buckets and it starts to creak a little bit as it goes around, and then all of the machinery starts to purr and hum, and there's really almost no noise at all. It's just a giant vibration. It's a lovely sound.
When you're right here in front of the mill, it's like going back 150 years or 200 years. Milling was a very important early industry. I mean, almost every creek in Kentucky at one point had a mill on it. Very few have survived, and very few from this period have survived.
Grist mills were absolutely essential. Nobody would have been able to bake any bread, make any cornbread, have any cornmeal if there had been no grist mills. So it was also a social center because people would have to wait here while their corn was being ground, and there would have been, I imagine, a great deal of talk, gossip, and so forth.
The original mill was built about 1820, 1825. In 1860, a man by the name of Miller, Herman Miller, acquired the property and operated it. He was a much beloved individual, and his neighbors all found him a fun person. One of the things that he did, which he earned money, was to grow butter beans, and he was known most of his life as Butterbean Miller.
The Millers who used to run the mill, that family is still in the area because they have come back from time to time and visited, and they're probably the great-grandchildren of the last Miller, and they still felt very connected with the place.
Since the 30s, this property has been owned primarily by women. Mrs. Cooper was an incredibly strong woman who preserved and conserved this property. She knew exactly what she was doing. I'm not aware of another woman in this region that was so almost belligerently protecting the property because she understood how special it was. You could say she was one of our community's earliest land conservationists.
Originally, she came out here or bought the place as a place for my father and his two brothers to be raised away from the influences of the city. My grandmother always kept the mill in running order. Before I was born, she would grind cornmeal and flour and so forth and sell it, and then she just ended up giving it away just to keep the mill in working condition.
And then the blessed fact is that then eventually Sally Bingham bought it. And Sally has an equally ferocious desire to preserve this from development.
I first came out here as a child. I used to ride my horse from Glenview, if you can believe it. Of course, Mrs. Cooper was living here then in the big house. And we also used to come out for picnics occasionally on the weekend and go back in the woods and walk to the stream, the waterfall.
I think most people would be shocked to know that there's a place like this close to Louisville.
I've had the pleasure and the honor now of bringing at least 30 people to this property who've never seen it before. Most of them never knew anything like this existed. It's been very quietly held, which we will continue to do because we want to preserve it intact. And the enjoyment that they have on knowing that A, this exists, and B, it will be preserved is, I would say that many of them move to a state of just profound pleasure.
Wolf Pen Branch Mill is remarkable because of its combination of natural ecosystem that has been untouched for generations and exquisite historical and cultural resources like the mill and the cottages that have also been so ardently preserved. And now, thanks to the commitment, vision, and generosity of landowner Sally Bingham, a conservation easement has been established in partnership with Riverfields and the Kentucky Heritage Council, guaranteeing that this land will be protected and maintained forever.
Sally Bingham called me up about 18 months ago and asked me one evening if we would be interested in accepting and holding a conservation easement on this property, and we were just thrilled with the offer.
The role of the Heritage Council will be to assist Riverfields in the administration of the easement. So we will be doing annual inspections on the historic aspects of the property, making sure that it's maintained. We'll work with the property owners, suggesting types of work that needs to be done. So this is an ongoing relationship with our office, with whoever owns this property in the future.
Riverfields was founded in 1959, almost now today 40 years ago, and it was founded by major business leaders, including Archibald Cochran, and their vision was that the city needed to pay attention to the river because the river is the reason that we're here. But we're not just a river conservation organization that does advocacy, we also are a land trust, and in our land trust activities is how we are involved in this project.
I think the whole East End would have been destroyed probably by now if it wasn't for Riverfields. It's the kind of organization I believe in. It's small, very dedicated. I don't think they have access to huge sums of money, but they have access to something even more important, which is the belief that parts of this beautiful land can be preserved. It doesn't all have to be developed.
An easement is when you give away voluntarily your development rights, and you give them away. There's a value to them, and you actually get several tax deductions for them.
The easement is the next best thing to actually owning the property. It controls the future development and any changes that will happen on this property based on what the donor has requested in the actual easement document. So it's up to the organizations that hold the easement to uphold the wishes of the original property owner.
You have to have a certain kind of nonprofit that agrees to be what's called the grantee in the easement, and that nonprofit has to continue to monitor that those development rights that are given away are never used again. And so the land continues to pass on from generation to generation, or from owner to buyer to owner to buyer.
In more rural areas, the conservation easement is an enormously useful tool for preserving family farms, where families without a lot of wealth aside from their farm have ended up with a piece of property that's worth more than anything else they own, and yet they want to preserve it. But they're trying to deal with the escalating prices of property that's eligible for subdivision.
It has some very large financial advantages for the landowner because since the land can no longer be valued at development prices, it cuts your taxes by a very large percentage.
It's also a perfect way for a property owner who loves a piece of property to be able to say, this is the way I want this property to remain no matter who owns it.
So it really serves two purposes. It makes it more possible for families to hold on to land, and it makes it certain that the land will never be developed.
And we want to thank today Sally Bingham for her extraordinary leadership. She has done something no landowner in Jefferson County has ever done this. In fact, her gift, which is valued at $4.7 million, is 4.7 million. 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 is a size of gift which we believe may be the largest conservation gift in all of the state of Kentucky, in the history of Kentucky.
I think I'm following in Mrs. Cooper's footsteps. The original owner, she was a collector of wildflowers and a great believer in using these woods as a safe place for all kinds of natural wildflowers that are found in this part of Kentucky. So I think I'm inheriting the idea from her, perhaps, that this is a special piece of land that shouldn't be torn up and covered with more colonial houses. This is our heritage. This is our history. Our history is not subdivisions with 200 houses in them. This is really the history that has existed long before the current population explosion and the explosion of suburban houses. This is the way Americans lived for 200 years. So it's essential for us to remember that and not lose track of it in the great growth of greed and consumerism that has taken over this country.